Hello humans. Today I want to talk about this guy right here. This is the Kershaw Strata XL. This is a very large knife featuring a clip point blade, G10, black G10 showside scale, and a steel liner lock. The clip point blade is in D2 steel, as you can see, and it is an in-house design for Kershaw. So, to start off with the blade, large clip point, we have a fairly well done swedge section, a little bit of jimping back here on the spine, right for your thumb, and a nicely crowned spine. This is actually a very, very comfortable knife if you are holding onto the blade at any point. My biggest complaint about this knife is something that Kershaw does relatively often, and it's actually the reason I started off on a negative note with D2, and that is this has a bleed blasted finish that just absolutely traps moisture. Keeping this thing stain free is extraordinarily difficult, especially compared to something like a tumbled or even a satin finish. Does so much of a better job not ending up with this, like you can see a little bit there, just rust buildup, patina buildup on it, which depending on whether you like your knives to look patinaed or not, can be very annoying. I'm not a huge fan of it with how clean the rest of this knife looks. I find this to be extremely annoying, and it's just the bead blasting traps moisture so badly, and it also shows off, like you can see, there's scratch lines and stuff like that from use on the blade, and it just shows them off so well, which is a little bit annoying. The blade itself is actually 5.4 inches, according to their official marketing. So I need to get a tape down here, but I actually don't have one. For right now, that's at 5.4, and that does seem to be pretty damn close to where it's sitting, which is pretty neat. So 5.4 inch blade definitely puts this into a large knife category. As I mentioned, nicely crowned spine. The swedge is very clean looking, very well done, which I do quite like. Straight clip point. I believe it is a true straight clip point. Oh no, it is ever so slightly curved, but it is very, very close to a straight clip point. We have a G10 front scale with excessive milling on it. You can actually see all the mixtures of texturing and angles, and it is quite comfortable. Like, I'm not gonna lie, this is pretty nice. I don't know how much added traction this texturing right here is giving you, but it is very comfortable in the hands, and I've never had it slip out, and I have used this for drill training and stuff like that. So it's definitely fairly grippy. And aesthetically, the patterns do look pretty neat, especially with the milling on this copper pivot collar. You can see super neat angles and stuff like that. Flip it over the backside is a lot more basic. We do still have this sort of indented area. And rather than scalloping, we get our frame lock bar, which is bent in, which provides sort of the same thing. A frame lock on a blade this sort of, like a frame this sort of short, is a little bit annoying. It definitely could have been done better as a liner lock, in my opinion, but it still does function fairly well. You just need to be very careful to keep your fingers away from the lock bar when you flip. I find like way down here is actually what works best, but once you can get it to work, it does work quite well. Like I said, steel frame lock. We have a very deep carry pocket clip mounted right at the back here. It's actually mounted to the inside on the back. We have fairly minimal hardware, and again, nice details. The barrels are actually the same copper color, which is pretty damn neat, and not something I would necessarily expect from sort of, I mean, this isn't an inexpensive Kershaw necessarily, but it's not one of Kershaw's premium models. This cost me about the same as the Iridium did. So in and around that 160, 170 bucks out the door. That's taxes and everything. Which isn't bad at all. The pivot collar on the lock side is significantly less showy, but it still does do its job. And then we have a stop pin, just sort of mounted in its traditional spot. It does run on bearings, and in large part due to how big the blade is, this is exceptionally smooth, an absolute finger guillotine. D2 blade steel for such a long and, fairly speaking, thin blade also makes a lot of sense. It's quite tough and it does hold an edge very well for a more budget-oriented steel, which I think is quite nice. Like, this is, I think D2 is a good choice. I just don't like the finish that they went with necessarily. The other thing is this handle tapers down quite a bit. So if you're choked way back here, you actually have a very different handling experience. This is a much thinner, more nimble feeling blade than if you're working with it up here, which means that I find, at least, it does work quite well both as an EDC blade and as a self-defense object. Because the choking back gives you a lot more nimble edge. It keeps you a little bit further away, giving you more reach for a poke. And this angling actually in the handle makes it quite comfortable to thrust with if that is something that you are inclined to do. And the type of training that I have does actually benefit a thrust quite a bit, so I find that quite nice. The big downside to these handles are they are very, very thin. I believe they're actually under 1/2 inch. Let's find out. So in terms of our handle thickness, we are looking at, this is off the pivot collars, about 437 thousandths, and then on the pivot collars, it's going to be a hair over, 470 thousandths. So it's really not a thick handle whatsoever, which does have its downsides, right? Like using this for extended periods of time on wood or something like that, I do find very fatiguing for my hand, which is a little bit frustrating, but definitely not in a world-ending way. You know, it's just, I do wish it was a little bit beefier. And it's, like I said, not a huge deal. It is still fairly comfortable for being such a thin object. The more annoying part is how narrow, like how short the blade is, and especially the usable part of the frame when you're flipping. This is kind of annoying to work around. It's a very tall lock bar, which is good, theoretically providing more strength, but it's not like, even if I just have my finger lightly rested on there, it is actually quite difficult to flip this blade. I'm talking 3 or 4 times the amount of force that it takes to flick it open normally. The other thing is for our sort of height in the handle, we have a fairly tall blade, which does help with slicing performance quite a bit. At its tallest point, we are talking 1 inch, 335 thousandths, just about. And then in terms of blade thickness, we are talking like 120. That's going to change based on where I'm in the blade. Right around 125 thousandths, which is pretty good. I mean, for a blade this tall, you are getting a lot of slicing capability out of that. We do have a flat grind, almost full height. We have a slight flat up there, but really it's not that much. And then in the thicker section and out towards the tip, we have a swedge to even more improve that slicing performance. This thing slices exceptionally. So keep in mind, I've had this a couple of years. I have touched up the edge here and there, so this isn't necessarily, I'm not going to do like my foam cut test and my piercing test because it pierces like you'd expect. It's a very thin object, but just in a slice, it is hard to overstate how little drag there is in like a slice. It's very, very well tuned to slicing. The only thing is, you know, your knuckles are going to hit just because of the way it's designed, but slicing is exceptionally good. Just quite nice to see, especially on a larger knives. A lot of the times when you go for a larger knife, you're getting something that is overbuilt, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but does reduce its sort of usability. And for a blade that is just about 5.5 inches, right? 5.4 inches in the blade. This is a very easy knife to carry. It's slim in the pocket, while still being very, very, like, easy to use, I guess is what I'm going to go with. So it is hard to overstate just how friggin' big this thing is. So I'm actually going to do my size comparisons right now. This is it up against the WE Knives Banter. And, like, the Banter is only a hair bigger than this thing's handle. Here it is up against the Civivi Chevalier. And again, right, like the Civivi Chevalier is very, very distinctly a smaller knife, which is what you'd expect, right? This is in the extra large knives category sort of a deal, where it definitely belongs. Here we have it up against our Buck 110. This is what I consider to be sort of the upper size limit on a medium-sized knife. And again, we are talking less than halfway up the Strata XL's blade. And here it is next to a Zippo. So you can see the pivot collar, I mean, it is an oversized pivot collar, but the pivot collar is still just about the same length as the Zippo. That's probably 80% the length of the Zippo. This is a big boy. So, despite that, however, like I've been saying, it is very thin. Here it is next to the Buck 110, and you can see it is just a hair thicker than one side in the blade, right? It is very, very thin, and up against a Zippo, it might actually, yeah, this is pretty much exactly the same thickness as a Zippo, which it slips in your pocket very, very well. I wear jeans every single day. I do not have a pair of jeans that this does not fit into fairly comfortably, which is, in my opinion, quite nice. I do carry this thing from time to time just as an EDC, and it works perfectly great. It absolutely chews through cardboard. It absolutely chews through woodworking tasks. My only real issue with it is if I'm using it for extended period of time, the thinness of that handle does get a little bit old, but really and truly, it's not so bad. And for a blade of this length, it's really not, like, I mean, balance plays a huge role in how comfortable a knife is going to be, and this is balanced right around where your index finger goes, right? Which means that this feels a lot lighter than it actually is. A knife with poor balance either feels very, very blade nimble or very, very blade heavy. And despite aesthetically looking like this would be quite blade heavy, the weight is right around the middle of your hand, which means that for longer periods of use, or if you're drilling for a knife defense situation or something like that, it is easy to run for an extended period of time without any discomfort. Despite how sort of non-aggressive these jumps look, I'm actually getting quite a bit of positive traction with them, which is very, very nice, right? Like, deep carry pocket clip puts this thing entirely inside your pocket, right? Which works very, very well. It is angled, it is one position. This entire knife is very specifically designed for right-handed people, which is a little unfortunate, but I am right-handed, so I don't see it necessarily as that huge of a problem. And I can still manipulate this with my left hand, although it is a little bit trickier. In some ways it's easier because I don't need to worry about where I'm putting my fingers. But because of how much of a finger guillotine this is, and how not used to using my left hand I am, the only time this blade has bit me has been manipulating it with my left hand. Overall, if you like a big knife without being overbuilt, like if you just like that extra length in a knife, this is a phenomenal choice. The Strata and the Strata XL, they're both D2. They're both very, very nice knives in this very big knife category. And in my opinion, they're both just aesthetically very pleasing, right? I find it quite easy to carry. I have no significant issue carrying it. My biggest complaint, really and truly, is with the finish that they decided to do on the blade. That bead-blasted finish is just, especially on D2, I do not like it. The thinness of the handle gets old with an extended period of use, but like, day to day, how often are you using your knife for half an hour or longer? It's really not that common of a thing, which means that for me, it's not a huge issue. D2, fairly easy to sharpen. Kershaw, generally speaking, does a pretty good job with it. I haven't experienced any chips, and again, I use this for hacking and slashing on wooden objects, padded objects, which is going to be significantly easier on it than a wooden object is, but like, I use this for the kind of stuff, and I've experienced no edge issues, deformities, rolls, anything like that, which is pretty good, right? Like D2 is a good option for a long blade like this. So yeah, overall, definitely think it's recommendable. I think that you're not going to see very much in the size category or this quality for this price point. There are nice knives available in this, $160 range, but they're generally speaking more normal EDC size, right? Like you're not going to see the biggest you might be seeing in this range, and I actually think this was a little bit more, is something along the lines of the CRKT M16, and this thing genuinely dwarfs the M16. This is the M21. No, this is the M21. The M16 is the smaller version. My apologies. But like this thing dwarfs the M21, which, I mean, yeah, it's a big knife, which that's what this boils down to. If you like big knives, you're going to like this. If you like overbuilt big knives, this might not be for you, but if you just like bigger knives, this is a phenomenal option. And I mean, hey, it's worked for me for a couple years now, and I have less than no complaints. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.